Today we'll be talking about the impact of magical thinking on effective problem solving. What's that about? So while I was sitting there, my husband said, "Are you ready for this?" And I did this. What is this? Magical thinking. And we all engage in some form of it. So imagine this. You are running late for your appointment and you grab your lucky pen. And the one that you have used for every successful meeting. And you whisper to yourself, "Oh, let this go well." And as you step out the door, something changes. You feel lighter, calmer, just more in control. Deep down, you know the pen or doing this doesn't really have any powers, but thinking or believing that it does just grounds you. That belief steadies you, and for a moment, it feels as if the universe is on your side. That small action that we do sometimes, or the thought process that takes us through that path, is magical thinking. It's not about spells and sorcery. It's about how our minds reach for meaning when we are faced with uncertainty. Magical thinking has been a part of humanity since the beginning of time, from praying or carrying out rituals for rain to carrying out charms. Some people wear different kinds of charms for protection, of safety. Our brains are wired to create patterns, to seek control in a chaotic world. Even in modern societies, the same wiring still happens, and it shapes our thoughts and decisions today. So today, I want to explore how magical thinking in adults affects our ability to effectively solve problems, both as individuals and as a society. We'll look at where it comes from, its major driver, why some adults don't outgrow it, how it influences us, the risk that it poses when we depend on it, and most importantly, how we can overcome it. Magical thinking is the belief that thoughts, actions, or rituals can influence outcomes in ways that defy scientific or natural laws. It is that cognitive distortion that relies on unrealistic beliefs for control. As humans, we have the tendency to connect unrelated events, such as believing that symbolic acts or items can influence real world results. The way of thinking is not always irrational, as it is a very human thing to do. We all engage in some form of magical thinking, however logical we try to think we live our lives. We all have hopes and dreams, but often we lack ways and means to achieve those. And so we try and hope and wish and pray our desires into fruition. Everyday display of magical thinking includes believing in luck, in karma, in jinxes, thinking that prayer can bring about rain, touching wood to avoid bad luck, or knocking on wood, thinking that the universe sends signs for us, and believing that we can attract success simply by thinking about it. Having superstitions like avoiding the number 13, this slides ended up as 13 slides. And I tried to think of what to make it 14, and it didn't. So maybe it's bad luck, maybe it's good luck, maybe it doesn't matter. Well, here we are. Or having the superstition wearing a lucky shirt, or sometimes attributing illness or storms, weather patterns to divine punishment in cultural or religious context, and modern forms of conspiracy theories or pseudoscience that's disguised as intuition. So, when life feels uncertain, the brain doesn't just sit quietly waiting for answers. It starts to fill in the blanks. Our minds are wired to predict, to connect dots, and to make sense of whatever it is that's going on. But sometimes in that rush to explain the unknown, the brain creates patterns that are not really there. And society can reinforce this belief in the unbelievable through things like culture, media, religion, and even politics. From the earliest humans, survival depended on recognizing patterns. If you heard rustling in the bushes, and assumed that it was a predator, even if it wasn't, that false alarm could make the difference between life and death. Our ancestors evolved to detect connections even where none existed. This better safe than sorry tendency shaped what psychologists call agent detection. The instinct to believe something or someone causes every event. Over time, this protective bias has made us prone to seeing invisible forces even when there is none. Things like spirits or curses or fate as being the reason behind natural events. Magical thinking fulfills a deep emotional need in us, and that's the need for control. When life feels unpredictable, such as during times of illness, if we experience great loss or some form of failure, believing in unseen powers provides a sense of reassurance. It's psychologically soothing to think there's a reason why this thing happened, and it makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with. And this is why magical thinking spikes during times of crises like war, pandemics, personal tragedies, because it offers a certainty where logic and it guarantees some level of comfort. I call it the brutality of reality. As psychologist Jean Piaget noted, magical thinking is normal in children. It's even encouraged. As adults, we are supposed to outgrow this phase through experience and critical reasoning. But under stress, uncertainty, fear, even grown-ups can regress to that childlike mindset, hoping the world bends to our emotions. This wishful thinking can distort our relationship with reality. And religion often gives magical thinking in adults a home. As a coping mechanism that helps to ease anxiety and uncertainty, our brains find comfort, again, assigning meaning to rituals and symbols. Modern brain studies show that magical thinking activates the same neural circuits as reward, imagination, emotional regulation. When we believe in ritual works, dopamine is released, creating a reinforcing loop that makes us powerful and reassured even when cause and effect link is false, and it gives us a little bit of validation, and so we keep doing it. Cultural practices, religious ideals, and rituals are passed down generationally, often without critical examination. Magical thinking isn't confined to just our minds. It is a concept that's passed down and reinforced through our culture. Superstitions like knocking on wood or not stepping on cracks, throwing salt over our shoulder to avoid bad luck are all passed down generationally. And media narratives often glorify manifestations or miracle cures, contributing to the persistence of magical thinking in our societies. Religious and spiritual traditions also interpret natural events as divine acts or messages, further reinforcing magical thinking. Simply speaking, magical thinking survives because it speaks to our deepest fears, our hopes, and the uncertainty that we feel. With that said, while we understand the evolutionary need for magical thinking and how parts of our brain has been wired to hang on to some of these ideals, and for a time it worked for us, and we saw the value, the question that remains is, with all that we know today, all the advances that we have done in society, why do we continue to engage in magical thinking as adults? The successful growth and development of any society is dependent on how well they are equipped to solve problems. This means that we, individuals, at a minimum, must possess certain skills that allow us to tackle issues methodically and efficiently, like having sound foundational knowledge, a wide range of a set of critical skills, collaborative mindsets, and tangible resources. What has any of this got to do with magical thinking? I originally come from Nigeria on the west coast of Africa. At 227 million people, it is the most populous country on the continent with a median age of 18 years. In an attempt to identify why such a large, youthful nation is failing in the midst of obvious abundance, I noticed a peculiar mindset amongst the people. The logical whole. I now live here in America, and over the past decade, I have observed a repetition of the attitudes among a certain population of the country that I'd witnessed in my home country with similarly poor outcomes, but on a lesser scale. The common thread between these populations, who would probably not see eye to eye because of their prejudices, was their level of religiosity. Regardless of the strain, denomination, religious faith often holds the surrender of personal will and intellect to a higher power as a necessary part of good followership. When it is widespread, this demand has real-life consequences that impact the growth of any society. Before we go into religious surrender, which I just talked about, I would like to touch on some other forms of ideological surrender that may not be related to religion. This other ideological surrender is the tendency of us still as humans to hand over our capacity for independent thought in exchange for comfort, certainty, and also a sense of belonging. We are constantly told what to believe, who to trust, and even what side we are to pick. This push does not always come from bad intentions, but sometimes the message resonates with us due to previous prejudices because we want clarity as well. This desire slowly turns affiliation into our identity, and questioning the group starts to feel like betrayal. We all experience various forms of ideological thinking or surrender in our society. Some of us even engage in it. We see political surrender when citizens defend their leaders no matter how corrupt and incompetent they become. I've seen that a lot in my country, and I see it here happening as well. And we see nationalistic surrender when patriotism turns into blind loyalty, where we equate any type of criticism as betrayal. That also was one of my observations there, and I see it here as well. Cultural surrender is exhibited when traditions are preserved even at the expense of justice or reason. When people cling to, this is the way we have always done things. That is, I come from a very traditional society, and that is a phrase that gets thrown out constantly. So rather than asking if those things that we have done have served human dignity, we really don't care. This is how we do it. Let it be. Ideological surrender occurs when belief systems such as capitalism or socialism or environmentalism are treated as unquestionable truths rather than adaptable frameworks that is supposed to benefit humanity, the earth, and all its creatures. Even technological surrender now dominates modern life as people outsource their thinking to algorithms, influencers, and machines. Unfortunately, surrendering to ideology, religion, or a leader often simplifies the world into moral binaries, the evil versus good, heretics versus believers, and stuff like that, good, right, and wrong, which may relieve the anxiety temporarily, but this usually comes at the cost of intellectual honesty because we try our best to fit whatever else that wants to disrupt that thinking. We fight it, and it's cognitive dissonance. So as we try to justify our position, where rather than revise our worldview, we often distort or deny reality to protect our faith, our tribe, or whatever identity we have tried to fit ourselves into. A person may reject scientific evidence on evolution because it clashes with religious doctrine, or may ignore economic data. You see that data right now is not being released in our society because it clashes with whatever the political head is trying to protect right now. The brain learns to prioritize emotional comfort over factual consistency because it feels safer to remain loyal to one's group, even if it means suppressing curiosity or reason. Once people are conditioned to value obedience and followership over understanding, they're more vulnerable to exploitation, as we have seen, by those who promise certainty, whether it's religious leaders, politicians, or media demagogues. Claims are often not evaluated based on evidence, but on who delivers it and how it aligns with their existing beliefs. In the end, whether one kneels before God, a nation, a political party, or a technological system, the result remains the same: the surrender of our independent thought. So, I have a little ask. This is a question that I have been struggling with to answer. And who better than a room full of philosophers to help me with this moral dilemma as well? So I have a couple of these questions that I would like you guys to think about and provide your thoughts on. Does religious surrender condition the mind for other forms of surrender that we just talked about, whether it's cultural or technological and such? Are people more susceptible to blind followership if they're previously religious? And is the underlying issue a lack of education or critical thought and not so much their religion that makes them susceptible to magical thinking or surrendering of their thoughts? At the end of this, I will be posting this talk on my website, the www.thereflectivehuman.com, on the articles section. Just if you can share your thoughts on the comments to help me solve this problem, would be greatly appreciated. So, what is religious surrender? Religious surrender is the act of fully submitting oneself or yielding oneself to a higher power, often understood as God or divine authority. It involves relinquishing personal control, trusting the divine will, and accepting guidance without resistance. It involves relinquishing personal control and accepting. This surrender is characterized by faith, humility, devotion, acknowledgement of human limitations, and the belief that divine wisdom governs the ultimate outcome of life's circumstances. It is not mere obedience. It is the act of yielding control and trust in a higher power, often in the absence of any kind of direct evidence. And it means believing that the divine will or cosmic order is at work, even when life feels kind of chaotic. Across religions, surrender is often seen as a positive for the adherents. In Christianity, the belief of not your will, not my will, but yours, is a fundamental tenet of the faith. Islam literally means submission to God. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita teaches surrender to Krishna as a path for liberation. And in Buddhism, letting go of ego and trusting the Dharma are fundamental to ending suffering and achieving enlightenment. And since humans don't have any tangible interactions with their chosen deity, they have to depend on the directives of their deity's proxies, also known as religious leaders. And we know how those leaders can go to extremes with the directives that they give to their adherents. It must be noted that magical thinking is not always religious, as we have discussed. It's a universal cognitive pattern. Even atheists, skeptics, and non-religious aren't immune to magical thinking, believing that the universe has a plan, trusting in crystals, horoscopes, manifestations, elevating political ideas like we talked about to sacred status. And surrender too can be a secular theme, surrendering to fate, to nature, and even to technology. We're focusing this talk today on the religious aspect of it because obviously it has a much wider reach and much greater influence as well. Magical thinking is natural, even desirable in childhood. It fuels imagination, creativity, and emotional development. When a child believes that wishing upon a star makes a dream come true, or that their thought can influence the world around them, they're exploring cause and effect and learning to navigate uncertainty. In this stage of life, magical thinking is a developmental tool, a bridge between innocence and understanding. When adults and majority in the society continue to rely on magical thinking, it becomes a serious problem. What once fueled creativity becomes a barrier to progress and accountability. It begins to replace reason with ritual, and our efforts is being replaced with expectation. Our responsibility, not so much as we passively sit and wait for things to happen for us. A culture that clings to magical thinking encourages people to hope instead of plan, to pray instead of act, and to wait for intervention rather than initiate change. And coming from a society, it's on a daily basis, I see people who would sometimes, it's called going on the mountain, and they would spend sometimes up to 6 weeks in a prayer house because they have an issue that they need to deal with. And you imagine the amount of time and effort that is wasted when a good deal of the population just spends that amount of time rather than thinking through and strategizing. They're praying seriously, and sometimes it can get really feverish with those prayers. When this mindset becomes collective, like I mentioned, it erodes scientific curiosity, rational governance, and social responsibility. Innovation tends to slow down. Misinformation thrives, and individuals begin to surrender their personal agency, believing that outcomes depend not on evidence or effort, but on luck, faith, and divine favor. So, in childhood, magical thinking is a stage of growth. When it persists into adulthood, it becomes a form of stagnation. The command by religious faiths to submit will and intellect, which entails surrendering the ability to think and act for oneself, robs us of critical reasoning ability. Over time, this mindset fosters a dangerous tendency to disregard reality and truth, and this is what fuels that illogical hope. When we see surrender as comforting or morally grounding, in reality, it limits our thinking and undermines effective problem solving, both at the individual and societal level. And we see this play out in everyday life, where individuals with little to no scientific training or understanding confidently challenge professionals with years of study and multiple degrees, not because they have counter evidence, but because they feel morally compelled to defend their faith. Rather than withholding judgment and examining facts that are presented, they dismiss or twist those facts to protect their belief. And because doubt feels dangerous, even sinful, if expressed, faith is usually defended at all costs. Once we say God did it, the investigation ends because we have our answer. There is no reason to ask how or why anymore. That's where religious surrender starts discovered. Because when divine explanation becomes the answer, science has no more room to grow. In such societies, questioning is seen as rebellion, and education is often seen as a threat. And we either stop promoting, funding, or pushing people to attain as much education as possible. It has happened where I come from, and I see it here again today. Minds that could innovate are trained to obey, and truth becomes something that we have to protect as opposed to something that we have to perceive. Societies are often admonished to fight religious extremism, that visible, violent manifestation of belief gone too far. But I beg to differ, because extremism is not where the problem lies. That is the end state of a deeper psychological process. The real challenge that we face is combating religious surrender, the quiet, unquestioning condition that precedes and makes extremism possible. Religious surrender teaches people to stop asking questions, to silence the doubt, and to see obedience as a virtue. It conditions the mind to yield control to authority, divine and human, and to equate submission with righteousness. Over time, this creates a fertile ground for manipulation. When individuals are taught that loyalty outweighs logic, that faith outweighs evidence, or that authority outweighs inquiry, they become susceptible to exploitation by those leaders, ideologies, or institutions that claim to speak for the divine. This is how magical thinking, when left unchecked, evolves into fanaticism. The same mental process that comforts someone through prayers in times of uncertainty can, under the right influence, be transformed into devotion without reflection, into action that lacks a conscience, and obedience without understanding. Religious surrender often holds a few magical assumptions itself, that God answers prayers, that saints intervene in worldly affairs, that holy objects have powers, and so we either wear them or we hang them somewhere around, that suffering of humans has some form of cosmic purpose, and so we must accept it, or that miracle cures can come from our level of belief. Religious surrender also breeds fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of death and the afterlife, fear of blasphemy and sin, fear of independent thought, fear of knowledge and change, and fear of challenging religious leaders and popularly held beliefs, which has given these leaders a larger-than-life image that they continue to use to manipulate and exploit the populace, to their benefit usually. These leaders are often not bashful in wielding those powers. When societies operate under this mindset, they become resistant to progress and are also vulnerable to division. It cultivates that us versus them worldview, a hierarchy of unquestioned authority, and a distrust of collaboration, all of which are antithesis to effective problem solving. Though religions claim to promote peace and unity, by their laws and practice, they have created more intolerance and division than any cultural or economic differences that we have had. On the surface, many religions advocate for love, compassion, and solidarity amongst its followers. Scriptural teachings often emphasize the importance of community, shared belief, and collective worship. The idea is that individuals united under a common faith can find strength in numbers and foster a sense of belonging. This aspect of religion can indeed create tight-knit communities that provide emotional support and reinforce positive behaviors. And we can see that sometimes. Yet, the same religions that preach unity, ironically, also give rise to divisions within our society. These divisions often stem from different interpretations of doctrines, rituals, and practices. We have easily 4,000 denominations of one religion today, all bickering within themselves as to who is the right one. Even within sects of the same faith, conflicts can emerge when groups believe that their interpretation of the faith is the only correct one, leading to exclusion and hostility towards others who hold different beliefs. This exclusivity mindset undermines the very unity that religion claims to promote. Moreover, brief research into historical context of many religions reveal a pattern of conflict over territory, resources, and power, often justified through holy proclamations. Crusades, jihads, and inquisition illustrate how religious favor can mobilize people to commit acts of violence and discrimination against others instead of promoting the harmony that they claim. And we have seen how they continue to use this tool for control and division in our geopolitical and our social awareness. Our religious affiliations have consumed our identity. Within a 5-minute introduction of most Nigerians, you get the separation of I am Christian, I am Muslim, or I am not. Even if you meet a Nigerian here today in America, within a 5-minute conversation, they will try to find out what denomination you attend. If you don't belong to where they belong to, it becomes a mission to convert you because they're sure that you're going to hell. And so they take on that task of converting you to whatever it is they already belong to. And this affiliation has produced the opposite effect of community disengagement within our societies. The resulting desperation, fear, and anxiety born out of this negative outlook has taken such deep roots in our psyche and led to selfishness that any hope of collaborative change is slim to none. In our 21st century, where progress depends on evidence, critical reasoning, and cooperation, this mindset is profoundly dangerous. Fighting religious extremism because it destabilizes communities is therefore not enough. We must address it at its root. The normalization of religious surrender, the surrender of independent thought, curiosity, courage, personal responsibility, which has greatly impacted how we effectively solve problems in our society. Problem solving requires clear observation, analysis, and deliberate action. Magical thinking tends to disrupt this process by replacing investigation with assumption. A student that's failing exams might blame bad luck rather than examining their study habits. Someone facing medical decisions may rely on superstition rather than research. In certain cases, magical thinking offers comfort, but removes personal responsibility and the ability to react proactively. It tends to reinforce our cognitive bias. And this is when we see what we want to see, essentially, even when it's not there. We believe in signs. If I had pain in my leg and I tripped over a stone, and it happened twice, which was kind of weird, and that person says they have pain in their leg, try and see if you can trip over a stone and see if that, it works for you as well. And if we're not cognizant of the fact that there is no correlation between those two things, we might want to repeat that act, thinking that it just might work for us. And over time, these biases that we experience can create frustration and anxiety when it feels for us as opposed to what worked for the other person. And then we can get frustrated when our reality does not align with our visual expectations. If you believe that your thoughts can move mountains, you have no reason to pick up a shovel. Magical thinking in adulthood creates the illusion of control, where we might overestimate our ability to affect events by assuming that our wishing or praying or hoping can substitute the effort for evidence or for strategy. Unrestrained faith is seen in unseen forces, often leads to passively denying to passivity or denial. Adults who rely on magical thinking stop engaging in reality as it is and begin to respond to reality as they wish it would be. The result is a mindset that feels empowered, but quietly erodes initiative and progress. When faced with anxiety, the emotional relief we get from magical thinking may provide short-term relief, but it often leads to long-term frustration. When reality does not align with fantasy, we may resort to victim blaming. The other person did it, external body, the devil did it, and the other people who are different from me did it. And we begin to see perceived enemies in places as the cause of our failure. Rational problem solving involves defining the issue, gathering evidence, and testing solutions. Magical thinking shortcuts this process, as discussed, leading to poor decision making as well as stagnation. If we're able to hide under a blanket, why go out and face the world? It can be brutal. And so it leads to rejection of reality by fantasizing about unrealistic outcomes. And sometimes when we have no other out, when we have gotten so desperate and we know that we're unable to think of other strategies or solutions to get out of it, it's very easy to get stuck in that avoidance of reality. So the diagnosis for all of this for any individual who engages or who is still steeped in magical thinking is a poor application and ineffective solutions to problems that they may face. If one person in a group or a handful of people in a larger group act irrationally, they can be dismissed and labeled as crazy or unserious. We may avoid them or patiently wait for them to display or do whatever they're doing. And when they go out, then the serious people in the community discuss what it is that needs to be done to solve problems. But what happens if a majority of those people are the one who, if we take a step back, we would define as crazy and have one person instead saying, oh my goodness, what's going on here? That ends up with a society that is guided by illusions more than anything else. And it tends to struggle with public health, with economics, and also with good governance. Societies guided by magical thinking or wishful thinking can adopt policies based on ideology or superstition rather than data. Leaders who appeal to myth or emotion may gain power without really offering any kind of solution, delaying evidence and policies, such as ignoring scientific advice on climate change by saying the nature will fix itself. Leaders can also appeal to emotional myths rather than evidence-based solutions, like here in Texas, legislator once set out a bill called the Furries Act. And when he was asked where is the evidence for behind this bill, he said, well, there are other true things in the bill. Forget the Furries Act. And that's kind of what happens with situations like that. Managing population is always complex with a lot of nuance that must be addressed if justice and fairness is a priority for the people. When led by magical thinking, these complex issues are oversimplified into bumper sticker slogans, where empirical data is ignored or in favor of feel-good narratives. Policymakers, leaders, or even majority in the society adopt emotionally satisfying or ideologically driven beliefs about the economy and ignore evidence, logic, or trade-offs. It often reflects the wishful assumption that good intentions or rhetoric can override structural realities. Again, we have seen magical thinking in pandemics, where reliance on superstition led people to reject vaccines and believing in myths over medicine. where we listen to pundits as opposed to professionals for our medical advice. The promise for miracle cures also increases the chance for exploitation, as we believe some have all kinds of things. If you're waving your hand over somebody, then you're aligning the chakra, or the other one. And if we have serious medical conditions that are not treated, then we end up with poor outcomes. This is usually the first to be eroded when magical thinking dominates in society. Scientific literacy declines. Students may value rote delivery over inquiry, weakening a society's ability to innovate or to self-correct. Problems may persist across generations if practices based on superstition are never questioned. Magical thinking tends to oversimplify complex realities into dichotomies, again, of good and evil, us versus them, signs and omens, thereby fueling conspiracy theories and division. Magical beliefs can lead to collective delusion that fuels mass hysteria, scapegoating, superstition-fueled violence, or conspiracy theories that erodes the public trust. Magical thinking often resists falsifiability, hence the continued confidence in thinking that if you can't prove me wrong, that means I'm right. This makes it hard for individuals to adapt or evolve their understanding when new evidence emerges. Societies that reward belief over understanding risk sliding into mistrust and extremism. So let's start with the obvious. Life is full of problems. Big ones, like financial stress or family conflict, or small ones, like forgetting your keys or missing a deadline. The truth is, most of us aren't taught how to handle these problems. We're taught to follow rules, to memorize facts, and how to pass our exams, but not how to think clearly, to manage stress, and to act wisely under pressure. Without good problem-solving habits, we tend to react emotionally instead of rationally. We tend to avoid tough decisions, and we tend to make quick fixes that don't last long. And that's why learning a practical approach to problem solving becomes a game changer. So if we have established that challenges are an unavoidable part of life, and magical thinking and religious surrender both cloud our judgment and lead to poor outcomes, how do we break free from them? How do we solve and move away from instinctive belief to deliberate reasoning, from passively hoping for outcomes to actively creating them? How do we solve the problem of problem solving? The answer begins with awareness. Is there value in introducing a specific class of critical thinking skills as part of curriculum for school-age children? To start at an early age to encourage the habit of personal reflection, inquiry, and fact-finding. We must learn to recognize that our thinking is driven, when our thinking is driven by assumption, ritual, or submission to authority, rather than by evidence and logic, asking simple but powerful questions of why do I believe what I believe? What evidence supports my belief? And who benefits from my belief? We begin to restore control over our own minds. And that's a habit that, when introduced at an early age, can carry us into adulthood. Next comes critical thinking. This is the disciplined practice of analysis, skepticism, and open-mindedness. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. It's the courage to challenge comforting illusions and confront uncomfortable truths, no matter how painful it might get. Collaboration and openness are also vital problem-solving skills. It requires dialogue across differences, hierarchies, dogma, and rigid ideologies, religious or otherwise, tends to choke innovation. Communities thrive when diverse perspectives are encouraged and truth is valued over tradition. Also of import is emotional resilience. This is our ability to face uncertainty without retreating into superstition or panic. The less we fear ambiguity, the less we need illusions to feel secure. And finally, imagination and creativity. These are powerful allies, but only if they serve reason. Hope, inspiration, and visualization can motivate progress, but they must be followed by deliberate evidence-based action. In essence, solving the problem of effective problem solving means rejecting religious surrender and blind obedience, which is a primer, actively promoting critical thinking, curiosity, and evidence-based reasoning, starting at an early age, replacing faith-based comfort and evidence-based reasoning, however uncomfortable it may be, promoting dialogue and also the value of education, strengthening emotional resilience against uncertainty so we don't devolve into panic when we face things that we were not prepared for, and using imagination as a tool for progress rather than a substitute for thought. Only then can we have a society that is resistant to manipulation, preserves our individual agency, and promotes effective problem solving that is grounded in intelligence and our shared humanity. When we do this, when we learn to think critically, act collaboratively, and face reality with courage, magical thinking loses its grip. Problem solving becomes not just an intellectual process for a few, but a moral one, which is the choice to see the world clearly and to take responsibility for shaping it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's open it up for questions. Yes, Dave.
Yes, you raised a number of interesting issues, and as a generality, I'm very much in agreement with you. There is one thing I would push back on that I think is kind of central to your thinking, and I'd like to receive your response. And that is that it seems to me that almost all thinking, or at least almost all thinking of the supposedly objective world out there, is magical thinking, including scientific thinking, logical thinking. All of this is we experience the world. We seem to think we see patterns out there, which are abstract, and we generally assume that those supposed patterns that we think we've identified will repeat themselves in the future. And that's true in science as well as it is in religion.
I do agree with you, and that is where my last point states there, that we cannot do without thinking. Obviously, it is thought. You find patterns and stuff in any subject at all. It's something that we all rely on specifically, but it has to serve reason. We have to know when it goes from reality into fantasy. And it takes a conscious, intentional approach to these things for us to be able to say, okay, if I dance around 3 times, that person will fall. There is that demarcation between that thinking and saying, okay, if there is a tangible thing that I'm observing here, if I put red and blue, it gives me a color, and that is consistent. So there is that division there where we are able to see. It's a normal human thing for us to do, but it all depends on how we apply it to our day-to-day.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Sort of kind of stole my criticism. Yeah, it seems that you use the word logic and rationality and reason and evidence and all these things. And I worry that those notions require some form of thinking. I might not call it magical, but some sort of ideological surrender. Because I saw you criticize ideological surrender sort of broadly, but especially politically, socially. But might, I guess this is sort of two-part, I'll be really quickly here, but is some surrender necessary? Some surrender of some sort necessary so we can all agree on what is rational, what is logical?
I wouldn't call it surrender as in a type of allegiance. It is okay if there's an affiliation with something. I belong to a group because we think alike or we feel that we're able to do something together. But when you find a situation where I was watching an argument, philosophical argument, on YouTube recently, where someone was pushing back on the idea of I don't believe in evolution, and that was largely because of the creation story. So when you find that it's their religious background, there's that need to protect that information, because if I agree with you that that evolution is true, it belies what I believe. So that's the angle from which I'm coming from.
I guess just real quick, is your presentation really just more of a critique of the non-material world? Like, is it just more of an advertisement for materialism or naturalism? Sort of say like we should just believe what can be empirically observed?
I think it's more a thing of being able to, I guess to an extent, not fully that, to say, let's be, and I'm going to use the word rational as well. If I am having a conversation with somebody and I'm talking about, oh, there's a ghost in here that does something, it requires for me to prove some kind of evidence that there is actually a ghost that is in our midst. Or if the picture moves, I have a rational reason as to why that picture moved. So kind of in line of that.
Okay, Rob, and then the lady way in the back. Rob?
Yeah, we're coming up on the commemoration of Thanksgiving in a couple weeks. And that was associated with the Pilgrims. A lot of people don't realize that the Pilgrims had a very strong belief in predestination. In other words, they were the elect of very few people that would be going to heaven, but also they were favored on earth. And so they were constantly looking for the evidence of God's favor. For example, one time they came on Cape Cod, they dug up all this cache of food and they knew it was left by the Native Americans. But yet they thought, well, we should take it because it's evidence of God's providence. So if the point is, if they had looked at all the problems and the many problems that would be coming to America, they would have never come to America. I mean, the hardships they experienced. So they were using this idea of God's favor and providence to motivate them, and consequently, you know, we're an English speaking country for the most part. So the thing of it is, taking risk involves going against what would be a logical, well thought out plan, because then we wouldn't take very many risks.
And I completely agree with you, but the thing also remains that it can only take us so far. We have to dream. You imagine, when I first met my husband, he used to talk about a classmate of his who used to describe this television in the 80s, like a screen that's so flat. We have movies that talk about flying cars someday. Those are dreams that we can have. Those are fantasies that we can have. But for that to happen, we need to do tangibles. We have to utilize what we have. If we sit and we assume that, you know, it's going to take, think of a magical thing, crossing our fingers to make that car come into existence, then we have shifted from where imagination and creativity serves us to where it begins to actually harm us and lead to stagnation.
Very good. Okay, ma'am, way back there.
I was just, I guess, gonna ask, I really like some of the things you were saying about how paying attention to this kind of thing. Really, like, it's really important to be like collaborative, stay creative and stuff like that. And I think that kind of, I'd really be curious to hear how you use like the way you think about that to help with your development and like process background and work. Cause that's something that I also think is really interesting, is like how do you make companies or like make people feel valued and heard in like a work setting with this kind of thought process.
So I'm going to use a very immediate conversation that I think Rob even talked about here today. The largest scale of the project that I'm working on is creating those life skill topics. There are things that we grow up and nobody really talks about. Some of the topics that we have on the website is dealing with loss. If we are preemptive in things like that, let's say you have an 8th grader who we discuss death preemptively to say this is a part of life. It takes away that fear that they would grow up. I've seen where I come from, people just literally devolve into, I don't know, a panic state because they lose somebody and they were so unprepared for it. If we approach some of these things with prior knowledge, these are things that can happen, we are better prepared or able to advance into them. And so back to the story of this earlier this month, I guess, a group of young ladies who are unhoused, but who are staying in a kind of like a group home. And a lot of them have not had the influence of strong parents or homes to be able to ground them. And we're able to have these conversations. The one that I did, last one that I did with them.
So our friend's place.
Yes, the last one that I did with them was finding purpose. A lot of the time, if you're religious, your purpose is worship. And if I am worshiping as I'm supposed to and faithfully, the feeling is I have fulfilled my purpose. But that also disregards humanity and everybody that you live with. If we understand that, maybe to some extent, we are here without a purpose. We find our purpose. We see what it is within our society, and we're able to help plug holes as well. We're able to add and build and create value beyond what we normally would if we just feel, okay, I come, I do what I need to do, and I go away. So it helps us just be more intentional in our day-to-day actions.
Okay, David.
When I listen to you talk about religious surrender, it seems to me to suppose a certain kind of religion that doesn't exhaust what the religious categories that I know of are, you know, in particular, certain kinds of religion would say, not only do we believe in some kind of divine force, but we know exactly how to describe that force and define it, and we know what it requires of us. You know, it's written in a scripture, or we know it. There are kinds of religion that would be more agnostic about that and say that force is there. It's way beyond our understanding. So all we can do is exactly the process you described of the critical reasoning to try to grow into that, you know, as opposed, there's nothing to surrender to in that kind of religion except your own growth of your own understanding. And the other dimension I think it assumes is that you're assuming the transcendent as opposed to the immanent when you're talking about the divine, because if the divine is immanent, you know, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you. And so if you're not going to be passive waiting on something and not out there active, if you believe in an immanent God, like the prophets in Israel, you know, they didn't just say, you know, well, let's just wait and it'll happen. They directed the people to, you know, take certain actions to become activists, basically. So I can relate totally to what you say on probably 80%. of what modern society would call religion, but my criticism is I don't think it exhausts all understandings of religion.
That kind of is the reason why I had that little ask on there, because I know that there are still a lot of nuance that goes into this. But there was also something that you mentioned just now about the prophets and directives. So taking note of those two words, where the adherents typically come to the prophets and they receive those directives. And if you have a prophet who is sincere of heart, you know, they're able to give good directives and they're able to steer the members to goodness. If you are unfortunate enough to have a selfish prophet, then anything can happen.
Sure. Beware of false prophets. I think
Yeah.
that's
Very good. So, Randall and then Harry.
First, again, thank you for your presentation, and I think you're in an excellent space in terms of what you're trying to do, and you're talking about the reflective human and kind of there. It seems to me that, and I guess want to get your confirmation on this, that what we're experiencing is a transition, an evolutionary transition from the old way of how you become an adult, which is you learn your traditions, you follow it, there's a coming of age ceremony where you learn adult ceremonies, to the modern chaotic environment where things are much more wide open, and that strategy of just doing what your parents did doesn't work anymore. And so the failure, whether it be in religion, education, politics, whatever, is that we haven't developed new and better ways to teach people how to be adults.
Yeah.
How to transition from childhood, where absorbing the information from your elders is a positive, through adolescence, where we have that period of time where we question everything, into adulthood, where we now have a working set of tools for how to manage modern life as opposed to ancient life. Is that?
It is. We, like you just mentioned, find ourselves in this situation where a lot has changed. We're no longer in small communities dealing with small issues. Everything is all grown up, and you find how someone needs to deal with. I think one of the issues within the American space right now is that a lot of the people are forced, and I use that word lightly, to deal with diversity. A lot of people are not equipped to deal with it, and that's why you get a lot of that pushback. I think that if we begin to equip people a little bit better, preemptively, to deal with some of these issues, it makes us much better adults, or much better able to handle some of these things. We can't just let, the unfortunate part of it as well is that not only do we not teach these things, we value conformity. And so even if a child, I know in my society, if a child is asking too many questions, you can get spanked for it. Why are you asking? And so that period of inquiry where every child goes through is beat out of them. And so you just follow. And we need that to stop.
And I think, education has been modeled kind of, it's like there's a phrase that's used of what in loco parentis, which says, we as educators are the parents to the children. And so we use that model that says, you have to accept what I'm telling you in order to pass the test, in order to move to the next level, et cetera, et cetera. And we still have that model of, I'm the parent, I'm telling you what to do, it's your job to obey them.
Harry.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I agree with most of it. But you did speak a bit about comfort, and we look for ways of thinking that provide us comfort, and that religion provides comfort for a lot of people, whether they recognize that or not. But there's nothing wrong with some comfort. We should have Percocets, sex, just beauty in the world, and things that that recharge us or alleviate pain. But you know, the question becomes, once you're an adult and you're in charge of yourself, and you alluded to this a lot, Daniel, is, you know, in what degree, you know, do I become a drug addict to have comfort all the time? Or do I, you know, look for comfort as in certain doses, and that's perfectly okay. I think we often don't know, you know, when to apply what, and it gets confusing. And, you know, the other thing, not one person in here has uttered the word internet. And, I feel like, you know, that is a factor in a lot of this. It makes so many people think that, well, now I'm an expert. Now I have access to all of this. This reconfirms what I believe, and so therefore I can get into this dispute with you and say that I'm right. Something along those. So, you know, that's obviously a factor in how big this has become in the world.
Yeah, so you brought up two things there, the comfort issue. And for that, I would say if we're more intentional in the way that we approach stuff, one of the major tenets of a lot of the life skills that I have is learning how to prioritize well-being. We cannot live in reality all the time because we would then go crazy. But it's understanding when to draw that line. And for each person, it's going to be different. Or even for a very, again, using the word loosely, rational person, some of us will need to be pulled back if we have a good support system around us. But we cannot completely be devoid of comfort. We all need it. There is no point, I personally think, to life if we are just working and we don't have any opportunities to enjoy it. We all have to face some level of uncertainty in our lives where we need to be able to retreat into fantasy just a little bit. The difference is knowing that I'm sitting in fantasy, I'm giving myself 2 minutes or 2 hours or 3 days in here, and then I have to go back and deal with this thing. If I remain within that fantasy, then it becomes a problem.
So it's a balance. So I was
Yes, go ahead.
gonna ask, isn't that the case that we really want to balance it? Because I don't want to give up my childhood ability to play and
Yes,
wander.
yes.
Jesus. But this world would be way too boring if I don't do some of that. So there's a certain child innocence thing that the kid is discovering the world. Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about it. The parent that stops the kid from stomping in the mud puddle.
Yeah.
An example. And so, I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that
Yes,
there's a
it's
balance?
yes, the ability to find that balance, to know when something serves a purpose and when it becomes a problem. So understanding that point.
We have time for one more question.
Skip,
Skip.
I wonder if much of what you said about religion historically has in our modern world been replaced with technology. You mentioned the internet, but I think there's something that's quite a bit less benevolent than that. And that is that we are not appealing to people's comfort anymore. We're appealing to their anger. We want them to be engaged. We want them to be upset. We want them to keep staring at this little device. And they're not, I don't think they're being at all critical about what they're doing. And I'm wondering if this is a rabbit hole that we can't get out of, because we have now a generation that is being raised by a generation that was doing the same thing. Have we passed a point, an inflection point that we're going to have a lot of trouble getting out of? Yes,
So many,
does that make sense?
Yes, it does. This afternoon, I started a YouTube channel where a lot of the life skills are put on, made into videos, very amateur videos, and then put on YouTube. And today YouTube sent me a breakdown of how my videos are doing. More people are viewing such and such. When they want this, we feed them more of this, and so on and so forth. If I had any power, I would stop algorithms. Because I think, honestly, I think it is a very, companies do those things because it serves their bottom line, not because it serves society. And I don't think they have any incentive right now to stop it. And until we find a way for that to happen, it's unfortunately what's going to become our norm. I don't understand where if I view puppies and you feed me more and more and more and more and more puppies. Maybe I just liked one pup. And now I want to see a rabbit. And so until companies are somehow incentivized to not follow that, this is unfortunately a new normal. What this might, any of this might do is if we're intentional and we know that this is what happens, that because I view one puppy, I'm going to get more puppy. I will intentionally go in search of a rabbit. So it has to be a purposeful thing for each of us to do.
Thank you so much. And her book is up now in case you're interested, and
So this does talk about the magical thinking. The case study that I did is on Nigeria, but a lot of these issues I do flesh out just a little bit. I would love to hear your criticism if you get a copy. This physical copies are $15, but on Amazon they are $19. So if you want to pick up a copy, I have one here.
great. And
Do you
as an estimate,
I'm sorry?
Do you autograph?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yes.
Can't get that on Amazon.
yeah, yeah.
What?
So then as a token of our appreciation, we have the Story of Athens by Raphael, Dallas Philosopher's Forum, gift for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for having me.